I was one of those computer geek kids, and I realized at some point psychology was way more interesting to me. I was a psych major from day one of college, but I had this background in IT. So I had actually, while I was an undergraduate student, I was an adjunct lecturer at my four-year institution in continuing education. Oh, I was, taking classes Monday through Friday, and then Saturday mornings I was teaching computer repair and computer tech and all these other courses at the same institution. So I also recommend that as advice to students. If you would like to have an interesting experience, be part-time faculty at the institution that you're also a full-time student at.
You've just heard Jon Westfall, Associate Professor of Psychology and Coordinator of the Psychology Program at Delta State University. Eric had the opportunity to interview Jon for this 197th episode of Psych Sessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff. Folks, Macmillan is always here to help you confront today's toughest teaching challenges, like academic dishonesty. Their recently published Educator's Guide to Academic Integrity is full of ideas for using Achieve, which is their acclaimed digital platform, to take cheating off the table. And you can get it for free at macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions. So if you're tired of students putting more work into cheating than studying, then you should definitely check it out. And don't worry, Macmillan Learning has made it easier than ever to integrate Achieve's digital content into your course. Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning. Again, visit macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions to receive the Educator's Guide to Academic Integrity. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm in for a real treat today, and I hope you are too. I'm here with a friend of mine, Jon Westfall from Delta State University, and I had to look it up. I didn't know the exact location, so I'm going to cop to my cheat sheet from Cleveland, Mississippi. Jon, did I get that right?
You did. We're in a unique little location about 2 hours from Memphis, down Highway 61, the Blues Highway, and we're about 2 hours northwest of Jackson, Mississippi, and only about 10 minutes from the Mississippi River. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so you're not near the Gulf, but you are near water.
Yes, but we're extremely flat. That's hence the Delta and Delta State University. So we flood regularly, but thankfully most everything is built up enough where it's not too big of a deal. But it's a nice place to be. It's a small school, a regional public that has had its fair share of challenges, as all regional publics and all schools in general have had. But I've been here about 10 years now and been pretty happy working with my students.
So the Delta is not about changing students' lives. It's not about the Delta.
No, but it definitely does that. I'm in a community. One of the things I love about this community is that students really understand the value of education because they see the difference in the lives of their parents and in their community members. The difference between someone who might want to be able to give back versus someone who is just kind of scraping by in one of the poorest areas of the country. We have a very high poverty rate. And, everyone knows the stereotypes about Mississippi. Unfortunately, when it comes to education, our education system is not that great. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. And so being in a psychology department that is actually in the College of Education. We're not in our Arts and Sciences College due to some weird, historical issues here and there. It gives me a lot of satisfaction to be able to work with educators that are up and coming. I teach our graduate ed psych programs, and it's an interesting place to be, and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, so when you say education is not that great, are you talking about K-12? Are you talking about higher ed?
It's mostly K-12. Higher ed has the same higher ed challenges that you get elsewhere, but we have a hit and miss community college system. Some of the community colleges prepare students much better than others. The four-year institutions in the state are pretty much on par with anywhere else you would go in the country. But K through 12 is extremely spotty in terms of you can have two schools within 10 miles of each other. One is doing really well and one is doing really poorly, just depending on historical situations. We have a number of private schools that have built up over the years, private academies, and unfortunately, most of them did grow out of a segregationist history. That's how they separated off originally, whether it was 50 or 100 years ago. And because those instructors don't have to be state certified, they're private schools, so they can hire whoever they want. They have a large range in preparedness as well. So when I look at a student and I look at their background, I really do not know what I'm going to get until I meet the student. I can't use any of the rules of thumb of, they came from here, so they're probably going to be well prepared, or, they didn't come from this area, so I don't have to worry. I have to kind of look at every student individually and figure out where they're at and try to work with them.
Yeah. So, John, in the state of Mississippi, what are the two land grants? Is it Ole Miss and Mississippi State?
Yep, those are the two major land grants. And then we actually have 6 other schools in our public university system. So there are the 4 statewide schools are Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Then Jackson State is HBCU that is in the IHL, the Institutions of Higher Learning System. And Southern Mississippi is the other large institution. And then we have 4 regionals, Delta State, Alcorn State, Mississippi University for Women, and Mississippi Valley State University. So we've got a good number of public schools hanging around here.
And there's a population base of students who can keep all of the schools you just mentioned going.
It is a challenge, and it is something, my institution has gone from 3,500 to about 2,200 in the last 10, 15 years. So it's a continuing challenge for all of us, because our population is not growing. It is dwindling, if anything, in many areas. Have
you lost faculty?
We have, and it's been, I wish I could point out just one thing about, and I could say this is driving, that's driving. We've done good things to try to stabilize our enrollment. We don't have out-of-state tuition fees, so we're able to, be an attractive place for people in Tennessee and Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana to come over. But we have had some issues with loss of faculty. Ironically, I went through a fun situation where we're typically in psychology about 70 to 80 majors at any time, and we typically had historically 4 full-time faculty. During COVID, first of all, a bit of career advice for anyone listening: never become faculty senate during a pandemic. Never become the faculty senate president during a pandemic. It's a really bad idea.
John, okay, pretend like no one's listening right now. What were you thinking, John? Dr. Westfall, what were you thinking?
Well, when I got elected, president-elect, it was May or April of 2019. So I figured, no big deal. And then I come in April of 2020 into my presidency, and we're full-blown, work from home for those 6 weeks. And then we were hybrid starting in fall of 20. But yeah, during the pandemic, I was faculty senate president here. And then in between January of 21 and August of 21, 3 out of the 4 psych faculty found positions elsewhere. And so fall of 21, it was me and 70 majors. And I was the only one teaching in-person classes on campus, and a bunch of adjuncts that were filling out the rest of our schedule.
Okay, so a 4-person department, 3 of them depart at the same time. You're holding your finger in the hole that's leaking badly. Let me guess. They all left because a different institution gave them more flexibility that they could work from home?
That was one of the four, or one of the three. Another, he had just applied for a kind of a reach position or a stretch position, didn't think he had a chance in it, and ended up being competitive and getting it. So he didn't think he was going anywhere until an offer came in he couldn't refuse, just to kind of jump to a more research-based place, work more teaching-based at Delta State. And then a third, she had gotten an offer again it was actually at an R1, and she wanted to go back to that area. It was where she was closer to family. And so I wish I could say that there was some policy that my administration had made or some issue that drove people away, because I've been at schools where that's happened. But no, this was sort of like, well, I can't feel bad for this at all. It's just the perfect storm of setting me up.
And first off, and I'm going to guess that you feel the way I do, but I don't know that for sure. You never root against people who are leaving to advance their career. You know it hurts the department. But I am going to say this. Tell me that when the third person announced their departure, they felt bad.
I don't know. That was the one that came to me by way of administration just kind of informing me. And that person is still in communication with me. And I knew their rationale, but it was a tough place to be put in. It came literally a week before classes started in the fall. So I knew I had that fun situation where I'm at all of our opening meetings, and I did not know what my course schedule was going to be, because it was still, okay, who can we get for this? Who can we get for that? But you're right. I agree with you that I never wish ill on people going elsewhere, because one of the things I like about academia is that we're used to a cycle. We're used to having only students for a certain amount of time. It makes you really appreciate the moments you have with colleagues and with your students, because you know you're not going to get that mix ever again.
Dr. Westfall, what are you teaching in the fall? Everything.
That was about it. That really was about it.
Jon, how many classes did you teach that fall?
I had 5 that fall, and that's an overload for me. We're normally on a 4-4 load.
And
so I had 5.
And did you have adjuncts or whatever you call them?
We did have adjuncts, but unfortunately, we have a hard time getting in-person adjuncts here because we're in a rural area 2 hours from any major city. So they got all the online classes. We moved some things online. The adjuncts got it. So I had 5 in-person classes. So I was just kind of in the classroom all the time.
Were you still faculty senate president?
I had just transitioned to past president, which thankfully was a much less important load. I was still an officer, so I still had a few extra meetings to go to, but I was able to transition some of that off.
And it looks like from the website, you don't call them department chairs or heads. You were the coordinator of one.
Yep. Yeah, curriculum meetings went real easy that fall. I had to make...
you could have redone your entire curriculum.
Yeah,
all
I
in
was
favor,
thankful.
say aye. Opposed, same sign.
Just changed some curriculum stuff, but I did have to put together one change, and I'll never forget writing up the notes, and it just seemed so weird. It was like, well, I proposed it, and I voted on it, and we were good with it.
Right. The meeting went quickly. It was very amicable. For the first time in a long time, there was no dissension.
Yes.
I mean, there's a skit, there's a comedic skit or a one act play in there somewhere.
Yeah, there is. But it was an interesting experience, and ultimately it really connected me a lot with our majors more than I've always been connected, I think, to my students pretty well. I was also first year seminar coordinator for a long time at Delta State, and so I was still in that role while this was all going on. But it ultimately reminded me of something that I often remind my colleagues of, and I remind our administration often about it, that the boss of the faculty really are not the administrators ever. It's the students. It's doing what they need to be successful. And I tell my administration, the only 2 essential elements for a university are faculty and students. And we get the work done, and we ultimately created administration so that you can help us get that work done so that we don't have to spend our time doing things like keeping records and paying things. And But I truly believe that if you keep that mindset and you keep the idea that the only person on a college campus that a faculty member is remotely accountable to is their students, you really can't go wrong in creating a functional environment.
And have you convinced any non-faculty, non-student of that on your campus?
Well, they do not openly disagree with me on it. So I have no idea how much they...
Yeah, they're not going to openly disagree with you, John. John. They're not going to openly disagree.
Well, that's true, but I can only go off what people tell me. And if they're not going to, tell me I'm wrong for that, and I don't really know an administrator that can honestly look at you and say that they think that they're more important than faculty in the classroom.
No, they won't say more important, but they'll say, the people in accounts payable will say, well, you wouldn't get paid without me. And the people in parking services would say, you could walk to work without my ability to provide parking, and so on and so forth.
And I would reply that we have accounting faculty. And so if accounts payable disappeared, accounting faculty know enough about accounting and payable and all that they could take those roles.
Have you seen the starting salaries of your assistant professors in accounting?
Oh, yes.
Because I've seen the ones at Boise State, and they make more than I do after 32 years at Boise State as a full professor. And I'm not kidding.
One of our former marketing professors used to joke with me, and I didn't find it all that funny of a joke, where she said, what's the difference between a psychology professor and a marketing professor? And the answer was about $50,000 a year.
Oh, that I think she was lowballing it.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, rank to rank, full to full. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, rank to rank. I think she was being kind and not trying to hurt your feelings that bad.
Well, that is the other interesting thing about where I'm at in terms of cost of living and salaries. We're below national average on all of our salaries, but our cost of living is way below national cost of living. So that can
be a consolation for sure. So, John, I want to go back. You opened up with mentioning you're about 10 years in at Delta State. It begs the question, any other academic appointments before arriving at Delta State?
Yeah. So my background was a little weird. I was one of those computer geek kids, and I realized at some point psychology was way more interesting to me. I was a psych major from day one of college, but I had this background in IT. So I had actually, while I was an undergraduate student, I was an adjunct lecturer at my four-year institution in continuing education.
Wow.
So I was, taking classes Monday through Friday, and then Saturday mornings I was teaching computer repair and computer tech and all these other courses at the same institution. So I also recommend that as advice to students. If you would like to have an interesting experience, be part-time faculty at the institution that you're also a full-time student at.
So where was your undergrad, if I can ask?
That was at the University of Akron, outside of Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh. Sure. So you went from Cleveland to Cleveland.
I did, a roundabout way. Everyone said, welcome to Cleveland. I thought, this doesn't look like the Cleveland I remember. Who
is that from? This isn't Wizard of Oz. This doesn't look like Kansas anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't Kansas anymore, for sure. So my teaching career kind of starts with that experience, and I think that's what really made me to the point where my students hate that I don't cancel class, and it's because those first students, if I canceled on them, they wanted to know when they were getting the money back or when they were getting the class period. So it did change my perception on, it wasn't a great thing to cancel class ever. And then...
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So at Akron, were you teaching on Saturdays first, and then you decided, hey, I'm going to add on psychology as a major? And probably one of the reasons might be because I can take undergraduate credits for a reduced rate, or did you do them both simultaneously from the very beginning of your job there?
So it went sort of in the reverse. The story at Akron is that one day I was a new student there, and we still had course books. So physical copies of courses being offered, and I was bored, and I didn't have a smartphone at the time, or I didn't want to pull out my laptop or anything like that. So I was looking through the continuing education bulletin of what courses they were offering. And of course, as a computer geek, I was looking at the computer courses. The previous summer, between high school and college, I decided to stave off senioritis by getting a couple of Microsoft certifications I wanted in computers. Even though I knew I was going in as a psych major in the fall, this can't hurt. It's always been kind of a dream to have these letters after my name because I don't have any others right now. So I'm looking at the continuing ed bulletin, and they're offering courses in the stuff I just completed, and they're charging a lot of money for it. And I'm thinking, if they're going through a third-party company right now, they probably have to pay a premium to get them to teach these courses. They could offer them in-house cheaper. So I emailed out of nowhere the dean of continuing education and said, hey, I'm a student here at Akron. I saw your bulletin. I was bored. I was looking through it. You're offering these classes that I could probably offer cheaper for your institution if you're interested. And got an email back about 2 hours later going, well, we just signed a long-term contract with that vendor, but you sound like someone that we might want to talk to. So why don't you come in next Tuesday with your resume and we'll chat? And so I recommend taking chances like that because you never quite know what you're going to get. And that ended up with me teaching for them for 3.5, 4 years, a variety of courses.
So, Jon, you did that and you were 18 years old.
Yes.
So you understand how remarkable that is.
It was a weird thing to do.
You're entitled to use the word weird. This is America. You get to use that word as much. I call it remarkable. I call it entrepreneurial. You're looking through the catalog. You find psychology. You're bored because so what do bored people do? They look through college catalogs because that's how they entertain themselves.
Yeah, that's the truth.
You were born to be a college professor.
I think, it was sort of meant to be. But at the same time, I also have no idea why I got into psychology. For a long time, I told the story that I didn't want to be fixing computers. I wanted to fix people. That was a nice way to put it. But I've often thought about how did I end up with this sure understanding as a college freshman that I wanted to be a psychology major and get my PhD in psychology. And I really have no clue. I think I watched enough media as a child and adolescent that sort of made behavioral sciences look interesting and made psychology interesting. Everything from Michael Crichton novels to the Bob Newhart show reruns. And so there's a lot of things about my own past that I'm not quite sure why I did what I did. So I can't say why I emailed the dean out of the blue saying I can save you money, but it worked out well.
But that's I'm going to give you credit. That's a gutsy call for an 18-year-old. I'm surprised you even knew what a dean was because I didn't know what a dean was when I was 18 years old. I had a job on campus, but it wasn't teaching other people how to do anything. Okay, maybe how to make a homemade beer bong. But other than that, when I have a serious conversation with people about why I chose psychology, I end up, and I'm not making a joke here, I end up at the point, honestly, I think psychology chose me because I just turned out to be passionate about it. I had a double major and I didn't get in it to help people. That's a very noble outcome. I'm so glad so many of our colleagues do that and students want to pursue that, but that wasn't my ultimate pursuit. I think I help people as a professor in a different way than therapists and counselors and clinicians do. But in the end of the day, I think there's some thing there about it chose me as much as I chose it.
Mm-hmm.
As dissatisfying an answer as that can sound to some people. It's not disingenuous. It's just the best explanation I can offer.
I might steal that line because honestly, it could be the same for me. I grew up where I'm the first generation college student. My parents never were. My dad took a couple of community college courses and that was about it. He never went any further than that. My mother wanted to go, but there was no money for her to go. And so I kind of grew up with parents that thankfully trusted me and said, you're looking into this college thing. We'll take your word for it on what you need to do. My dad was in sales. And so that kind of gave me an interest in psychology, because I always joke that he knows just as much about psychology as I do, except he knows it all applied. And I can tell him what theoretical thing he's talking about just on what he's talking about when he saw
something. Foot in the door in the face,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when I got to college, I think psychology just spoke to me in a sense of, this is important in the world. This is how the world runs.
So if you don't mind going backwards a little bit, backward chronology, that is. You just said you're a first-gen college student. Dad had a little college. Mom didn't go to college. Do you have any siblings?
Nope.
All right, so only child.
I engineered myself to be an only child. My parents always said they had thought about having more, but then I had a knack of interrupting things, and also I was happy being an only child. So I guess I knew at an early age, just maintain this. It's a good life. You filled the world for both of them. They needed no more filling. Well, if you got perfection on the first try, why bother with something else?
Oh man. You just gave part of the subtitle to the title of this episode, Perfection on the First Try. Thank you. Thank you so much. Because the titles are tough sometimes.
Yeah.
This one won't be. Yeah, I'm the last of four, and there's an 8.5-year gap between my sister and myself. And my mother always was very careful to point out that I was a surprise rather than a mistake. My siblings, older than me, when they heard her say that, they like to disagree strongly.
Yeah.
So growing up, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask people, was it a question of, will you go to college, or was the question, what college will you go to?
It was not either, actually, in a sense.
Okay.
It was that I was going to go to college, but because my parents didn't go to college and I didn't really have anyone in my family that had gone to college, I didn't have any desire to go to any specific places. And growing up in Northern Ohio, obviously Ohio has a ton of higher education.
Absolutely.
Tons of places to go. And I was a senior in high school. I was taking classes that year at the local community college, Cuyahoga Community College. And I just happened to be talking to a professor there one day, and he was talking about, you'd be a really good fit for the honors program at Akron, and in my mind, I hadn't thought at all where I was going to go to school. I had a friend who really wanted to go to OSU, and he did go to OSU, but I had thought, colleges, they're like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Unless you're at a school that everyone knows the name of, an Ivy League institution or something like that, then you're just at college. And
or I thought, a Big Ten school.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, Akron is about 45 minutes away from home. I could commute there, but it'd be far enough away that I probably won't see anyone from my high school. I'll probably be, and I ended up, that was kind of my mindset. It was, I want to go somewhere enough where I can make a name for myself and do my own thing and not have this high school baggage to sort of, and I didn't have horrible baggage in high school. It's just like, I want a fresh start.
Yeah, we all have baggage. Yeah.
Well, and I think about it with my students today, and I remind them that their 18-year-old selves are the only version of them I've ever known. And I treat them as an adult because I don't know where they grew up and how they grew up. And I don't have memories of them at age 3 or 6 or, and in a small community like I'm in right now, that's a very rare thing for a lot of my students. A lot of the people that they interact with have known their family or know them. And they can't really have that fresh start with anyone other than their professors, because even the staff here probably grew up with them or knew their family growing up.
Right. When you were at Akron, how far along was the history of psychology collection, the library? Was that very far along?
It was still somewhat in its infancy. And one of my favorite things about being at Akron is that I got to take history of psychology from Dave Baker.
Very cool.
Only about, I want to say he had been in that director role for maybe, it was less than a decade at that time since he had taken it over. And
from Popplestone?
From the Popple, and from, And they were still in the basement of the Polsky building in downtown Akron, an old department store that the university had acquired the building of. So I remember taking that class with him, and it was always a fun day when we would take a little walk over to, it wasn't even a little walk, it was a long hike, but from our classroom over to Polsky and go into the basement and see the shock box and the Bobo doll and some of the high points of their collection. I haven't been back since they've built the museum. I have a picture in front of the museum, but when I was there, it was not open. It was during winter break, so they were closed. And I'm very proud to be an Akron alum when I see what they've built there and what they've done, because it's
I've never been, but I desperately want to go. Yeah. There's some really cool stuff there. And, folks from the STP world, like Charles Brewer, Bill Buskist, Ken Keith, they've donated. There's a room they've donated aisles, the bookshelves have their names on them. Charles Brewer has a reading room that he donated to the building of and maintenance of in his name and his wife's name. It's really awesome. Yeah, at the University of Akron Library, the History of Psychology Museum. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to keep going a little bit more backward, become forward in chronology. Did you start becoming a geeky technology kid in high school?
More around elementary school. My father bought a
Tell me about that.
Because he was in originally advertising and then sales. And so he figured he should learn this stuff because, the stuff he was doing in the 70s that would take all day with cameras and layout and everything else. He saw these computers in the early 90s were able to put together, lightning fast. But he never really got into it that much. My mother used it for like PTA newsletters and stuff like that, but she never got into it. So it was sitting in my dad's little home office, and my parents were basically like, "Oh, play with it. It's this computer that we bought. You might as well do something with it." And at some point along the way, I started getting interested in programming with it, and I bought a couple books on programming, and that was kind of my foray into being a computer geek, was making little programs and how would they work. And then I got really interested in system administration. That's a totally geeky thing to say, that you're interested in, multi-user networks and that. So I started playing around with that. I'd be scrounging up old hardware from people that were trying to get rid of it and, trying to get it to work together, start a little network in the house and all this other stuff. And by the time I was in the middle of my teen years, that was when Web 1.0 was really getting big. A lot of people, it was when, it was just at that point where you're seeing these shows on TV talking about what is the internet and what is, this thing called a modem. And so I started a small little software business that I think we sold like 3 copies our entire time in existence. We were never successful by any metric, but we had a website and I had some software you could download and install, some shareware software that, like I said, I think I sold 3 copies of. And that led to my interest in all of the IT stuff. And it ultimately turned out really nicely because during grad school, after I had left Akron and I went to the University of Toledo for my graduate work, my part-time job in grad school was being the system and network administrator for a web hosting company. So I had these dual worlds where I was basically being a psych grad student and trying to do all of that and programming up experiments and those sorts of things. And then I'd get a text on my phone or I'd get a phone call and I'd have to go fix a mail server that had just died or a web server that needed rebooting and all this other stuff from a crazy cast of small business characters that were customers of ours. And along the way, the funny end of that story is I used to have professors and mentors, well-intentioned, look at me and go, John, you really need to focus on just the psychology stuff. The computer stuff, it's interesting, but you're not going into IT, you're going into psychology and research and all of that. Because, of course, at that time, and even today, we push students toward the idea they're going to become R1 researchers and, you got to go that direction. And I would kind of pay lip service to them and say, yeah, you're right. And then I didn't. And then when
because they weren't paying you, the psychology side wasn't paying you or paying you enough.
Yeah. So when I did end up on the job market, it was right after the housing crisis, so not a great time to be on the job market. A postdoc announcement came through from Eric Johnson and Elke Weber at Columbia, and they basically said, we're looking for someone who studies judgment and decision making that also knows how to run a Linux web server. And I looked at the job posting and I thought, well, there are 3 of us in the country and 2 of them are already tenured. So I think I have a pretty decent shot at this ad. And about that time, an email came in from my advisor, my major advisor in grad school, who had the office right next to me. And it was like, you need to apply for this. Apply for this right now. This is you. And that's how I ended up postdocing there for 3 years.
So from Columbia then to Delta State.
With a little side trip in Louisiana. I was at Centenary College of Louisiana as a visiting professor for 2 years.
For 2 years. Okay. So I want to circle back to the computer for just a minute. I wasn't on the hardware side of that. And I have detected from your timeline that I am much older than you are.
It's potentially possible. Age is a weird thing in my mind, but I am 40 at this point, so you can do the math.
Like I said, I'm 60 at this point.
Okay.
So I'm much older than you are. But I got started in computers with an Osborne executive.
Okay.
And K-Pro was the competition, and CompuServe and AOL, disks in the mail, and all of that. And it was DOS as the operating system. And, I did I was just telling students today, they were kind to listen to the old man. I did SPSS on punch cards in my computer center. My first year of graduate school in 1985 was the last year of punch cards at Carbondale, SIU Carbondale, where you didn't submit on a computer screen. You got punch cards, and there was no screen. It was the teletext. You got paper to come out, and there were screens added later on. And if you had one period in the wrong place, or the backslash should have been a forward slash, you got an error. You had to decipher the error from the error messages.
And you found that out 6 hours later when you got your job report.
Yeah, and you had to walk back across campus to one place that had a printer and pick up your long 17-inch wide printouts with holes on the sides with green and white bars interlaced on the paper. So, you couldn't print out your emails. You had to print them and then go pick them up at a different location when the internet just launched. And we did a little bit of I did programming in BASIC. I never did in COBOL. I never did in any other language other than BASIC. But those are skills that, when learned and practiced, can last a lifetime and be very lucrative. I don't know if you have any businesses on the side, but you're an amazing resource for the Society for Teaching of Psychology as the internet editor. And that serves you and us well to this day.
Yeah, that programming mindset, is something I really hope to do with my students as much as possible, get them to be able to break down problems into manageable chunks, because it teaches you a lot about, well, obviously, those of us, and you had that experience of having to be disciplined in order to not have to rerun the same job 100 times. The computers, by the time I was playing with them, were a little more forgiving, but not much. I mean, I still grew up on DOS and programming where everything was compiled. And now I look at, modern projects like the Flutter project from Google, where it'll let you hot swap code, where you make a change and instantly you see a change in your app. And it's like, oh, wow, that is crazy. No compiling, all of that thing. I try to tell my students, you need to be able to break down things to their components, whether you're talking programming or experimental psychology or even interpersonal things. I teach our senior seminar because I'm the old guy in our department, because we're 2 now. So I actually have doubled the size of my department since 2021. But I remind them that interpersonal relationships are also just about making sure that you have a solid foundation. Just like when you're programming something, you have to declare your variables and all those things. You need to set up a relationship with your coworkers and with your colleagues. And that's why I enjoy the internet editor role in STP. And I also have some tremendous support in my associate editors, Evan and Alex, and the others, and the people that are on the tagging team and all of that. It's a great service that we're able to provide as a group to a great community. But it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't a group effort. And you need to have all the right kind of pieces in play for that to happen.
Jon, what are you teaching, or what's in your normal rotation of classes that you teach?
So, small program, it's pretty much everything. This semester, I'm teaching a section of intro psych, or general psychology, obviously, is kind of a staple for a lot of people. I have our statistics course. This is the first time I've cycled back to that in a few years, so I'm happy to be doing stats again. I have a history of psychology upper level course, so it's fun to go through that stuff. Not as good as Dave's course, but I hope to give my students some good stories there. I also have an abnormal psychology course that I'm teaching this semester, and then I have our graduate ed psych course.
Wow.
I'm all across the board. In the spring, I'll be teaching senior seminar again. I'll be teaching abnormal again, stats again. And I'm trying to think the other things. I teach human factors every couple of years, which fits really well with my background. So those are the years the students are like, what is this psych professor doing talking about writing books and technology and programming? That's weird.
And now AI. You got to add AI into that.
Yeah, I'm going to be on a panel Tuesday night. That's kind of our campus is hosting an AI discussion panel. So I'll kind of be one of the people on there to talk about the influence of AI. The benefit of a small department is that you can be a generalist in a sense, and you can pick up classes that when I was at larger places, it was hands off. That's so-and-so's class. You don't get to touch that class. Undergraduate, we're fortunate that we're giving really survey classes on everything. There's, you specialize still in psychology, mostly in grad school. So I'll cover a wide range of things in my teaching.
Well, the courses that you mentioned, I can see them all fitting together in someone's ability to teach them, except for one. I can see me teaching intro and stat and history of psychology because I've taught all those classes. But I don't think I could teach abnormal without a tremendous amount of prep, because I had an abnormal psych class in 1983. And that's the last time I've thought about that topic seriously. Mm-hmm. So, and I have said, as an aside to people, any professor can teach any topic, kind of thing. I could teach out of a book. It wouldn't be a very good course or a good experience, but I could teach it. But that's not the kind of thing that you want to do at Delta State or Boise State. So I hear you on that some faculty members think they own a course. I don't like that attitude at all. But I do like your framing of I get to teach all these courses. I do like that a lot.
And I have a pretty high need for cognition. So I'm thankful that, teaching general or intro psych will always make sure that you see things regularly. And we just did a big push this last year. Our new assistant professor in the department, Andrea Kuhn, made a big push for OER and for us adopting OER as much as possible in our courses. And so as I've been looking over all these wonderful open resources that she's found and that we're now using, I'll find stuff that is more up to date on all the topic areas I teach. And then when I do get the abnormal class, and the whole reason I'm teaching abnormal is that it's part of our core, and we felt strongly you needed core faculty teaching your core courses. You didn't want to adjunct that out. So it was like step up and get proficient in this so that you can make sure you're delivering at the level that it needs to be delivered at. Nothing against our adjuncts, but adjunct, it's really hard to be able to put in the mindset of what the program wants to do when you're only teaching one or two courses for that program and not sitting on the curriculum committee and not really privy to those long discussions.
Yeah, well, two things. First off, we have a capstone course that every major is required to take, either their last semester or the second to last semester. And for some of the very same reasons, we don't allow adjuncts to teach the capstone. We want them to have that from a full-time tenure track faculty member, because they're just more vested. Not to say they're not good teachers. Sometimes our adjuncts do a better job in terms of course evaluations, but that's what we want. And secondly, so I'm glad to hear that you're having a good experience with OER. When we've had a couple of our teachers experiment with it, they've had up and down results. Not always consistently good, but some good and some not very good at all, to be blunt.
Yeah. And when Andrea and when she came to me and said that she was interested in OER, and I had done some OER stuff years ago, we talked about how you need to have a central spot, in a sense, for it. It's all over the place, and it's very daunting to do an evaluation of it and find the best sources when it is all over the place. So that led us to the fossil project that we presented at APA, and there's a GitHub repository that we've now got set up that is assembling as many open source and open resources for psych departments as possible. Our goal is that we want to provide a one-stop location to find all of these things. And ultimately, we also joke that the project is related to this idea of a bachelor's degree on a budget or master's on a budget, because I've got little to no money in my department budget for anything, including things like SONA systems and stuff like that. That's why I wrote an article with Evan Hill a couple of years ago about doing an open source survey and, study administration system. We need to figure out these ways that we can capitalize on OER and open source, because ultimately for my students, they don't have the money to buy the texts that, publishers would like them to buy. They don't have, and nor will they, unless we force them to. And then there's an ethical quandary of first day access and things like that, where am I okay with the bookstore taking that cut by default and students having to opt out? And ultimately, I just want a more level playing field for my students. And if that means that I've got to do a little bit more work of assembling good sources and finding those, ultimately, as I said, my students are kind of my boss, so I will find.
Yeah, and I hear you on that, and I agree. And there's a yes and. This semester with my 150 students in my intro psych class, I'm not using a textbook.
Yeah,
they're actually sourcing readings through PsycInfo searches.
Yeah.
And maybe a couple of supplemental things here and there that I find on PsycInfo. So it doesn't have to be book dependent, although you and I know a lot of great intro psych textbook authors who do smashing work. They're part of our STP world. But you're right. I think in a situation like yours and your part of the country, if you can do things to minimize costs for those students, you're doing things to help maximize their ability to succeed and hopefully graduate.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
I see that is the nice thing about where I'm at. You can see those direct connections because it is a smaller community. We have a counselor education program that's the other part of our division. So the undergrad psych program and the counselor ed program live in the same administrative unit. And I've had a number of students go to that program, and I've got ones that I can think of that, knowing their background when they came to psych and, the hot mess they were when they came to psych, we're talking about, just not just personal struggle, but addiction and other issues in their past and abuse issues in their past. And now knowing 4 or 5 years later, they are out in the field working with the very people that they needed when they were younger. It helps. It helps quite a bit to keep the motivation to do some of the stuff that I do that is a little bit extra in terms of keeping up to date on things and doing the OER projects and such.
Jon, do you and Andrea have a research component to your jobs? We've talked a lot about teaching. I'm sure there's service, but in your workload, do you have teaching, research, and service, or just teaching and service?
Yeah, we're 60% teaching, 20% scholarship, 20% service. So functionally, what that means is as long as you have at least one research project going on at a time and you're making regular progress on it where you're, presenting or publishing. At our institution, our tenure guidelines are such that as long as you've got a couple of high quality pubs by the time you go up for tenure, you're usually pretty good.
Okay.
We balance it rather nicely where you can't take a complete break from it, but we also aren't expecting you to we're not saying 20% and actually meaning 80%, which can be frustrating for young people.
Yeah. And that double standard happens a lot. I think a lot of schools play gotcha. For Boise State, we're an R2 aspiring to be an R1. So we have a couple times every few years, there's a promotion case where a department says one thing on paper and expects something else when someone applies. And that's when it gets sticky, icky. So,
yeah.
Jon, I'm cognizant of the time. We've got a few minutes left. Was there anything that you were expecting me to ask about you wanted to talk about, or I just wasn't smart enough to think about it? And you wanted to make sure that you talked about X. Let's solve for X. What might X be?
Well, one thing is just I feel very honored to be asked to be on Psych Sessions. I've watched Psych Sessions grow, and I was looking through your past episode lists and just going, wow, there's some impressive people in that list. So I want to thank you very much for
now you're added to the impressive people, my friend.
I try. I do what I can do. I've got a lot of luck in my life. I had a dean randomly say, sure, come in for an interview. And I had other, that postdoc ad came through at the right time. So, but, I've talked a little bit about the fossil project. That was something that is current research that I'm working on that I'm excited about, and that we've got a Discord server up and running that I'm happy to have people
right.
if people want to chat. But honestly, I didn't have anything other than I thought this would be a fun conversation, and it has been. I'm trying to think of it. I kind of went through my whole timeline, and my big pieces of advice, don't become faculty senate president during a pandemic, be bold and ask people for jobs. You never know when they'll say yes. And just really, be aware of how psychology interacts with everyday life. The big pieces of advice I give my students, things like if the only time your colleagues see you at their doors when you need something, then they're soon going to associate you with negative things. So check in on your colleagues, stop by, just talk to each other. It's classical conditioning, right? If the only time you see me is right before I make a big ask of you, you're just going to dread as soon as you see me.
Or I'm going to keep my door shut. Yeah,
that can help too. And if you don't know how to do that in an organic way where you just wander around and talk to people, bring a bunch of like apple pies from McDonald's or other food that everyone universally likes and just pass them out. Then you'll get a lot of happy people that way. They'll talk to you.
I bring stickers and magnets.
Yeah, that'll work too.
That's my thing.
Stickers are amazing little reinforcers of
that use profanity.
Well, that even better. And then I guess my other big piece of life advice I tell my students is never argue with an idiot because they'll drag you down to their level and beat you by experience. So know in all interactions when to just listen and go from there.
That's very good advice, Jon. But here's the thing. It takes a while into that argument until you realize they're an idiot if you don't know the person.
Yeah, that's true. And
it may take a little time to figure that part out.
Well, and that's the way that, academics have, I think, and scientists have gotten in trouble over the last number of years, is that we don't realize that the discourse level of the people that we're working with is lower than normal, than what we're used to. It's often said that scientists are the easiest to fool because we believe other people are telling the truth, because that's what we were raised to do. And science is I report things honestly, and it never crosses our minds that someone might not be honest with us.
I'm going to show you my coffee mug. I've been taking different coffee mugs to faculty meetings, and we really can't say it. We could say it, but I have to mark the episode explicit if we do. But
I took find a appropriate way to convey the thoughts. It's blurring for a second there because you got the blur turned on. So okay, Oh, yes. So to those that are not able to see it, the sentiment is that science does not seem to care much about people's opinions of it if the evidence backs in its favor.
That was the most careful translation that I've ever heard. Maybe can I bleep? I think I can figure out a bleep. I'm going to say it, and I got to remember to bleep. Science doesn't give a fuck what you believe.
Yes.
But I'll bleep.
Yeah. And that, it's true that, if someone looks at you point blank and says, there's nothing you're going to say that's going to change my mind, well, then just stop talking, because they've already told you there's nothing you're going to say to change their mind. But we do need to speak up and say things when we can. And in a way that helps people see that we're trying to ultimately help them and not hurt them and not hurt their persona. We're just trying to make sure that the world moves in a productive way.
And regular listeners of this podcast can't believe that I've come back to this long. And Jon, this may not be the way to end, and I might cut this out, but I have a thing about the word luck. Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to that. I don't think you were lucky. Tell me one of the ones that, you started this kind of closing thought by telling me you were lucky, and give me one of your examples.
Being able to be hired as part-time faculty at age 18 at the University of Akron.
So first off, I would respectfully argue with you that there wasn't any luck in that at all. You didn't stumble into a hole and someone was walking by and said, I'm going to hire you. You put yourself out there. You were qualified. You had taken the Microsoft certifications. They didn't give it to someone who didn't know what they were doing. They didn't do it as a charity event. Once you started doing it, after the first time you taught, they kept you on for about 3.5 years, if I recall. So with all due respect, I wouldn't call that luck. I would call that a young man who had worked hard and put himself out there and knew who a dean was and had the guts to make a phone call, got a job offer, and made the most of it. To me, that doesn't sound like lucky. I think you're being humble, and that's a good thing. And I think sometimes we use that humility to substitute to not sound like we're bragging. And honestly, I heard Bill McKeachie do that. And I tried when we interviewed Bill McKeachie, Garth and I did, and he did that in front of me, I actually gently tried to have this argument with him, gently and politely, in front of a 96-year-old man, and he wouldn't have it with me either. So if you don't want to take that from me, I respect that. But I don't think that was luck, my friend.
Well, a quote that I have on my website, I have a list of quotes that circulate around, but the actor Robert Guillaume gave an interview one time where he said, luck has a way of rewarding those who do not depend on it. And
I think you're making my point.
Yeah, you do put yourself.
I think Robert's making my point.
Yeah. And it's true, but I've worked with too many people that have been good people that have had bad things happen, and too many bad people I've seen have good things happen to them.
This is true too.
So we have to remember that every opportunity we have in life, while we do set ourselves up for it in many ways, we need to recognize how fortunate we are when the opportunity actually comes to fruition.
Absolutely. There are fortunate events and there are coincidences, but I don't, in my opinion, may not count for squat. I don't think you got that job because you were lucky.
Well,
I think you get that job because you were trained and ready and you put yourself out there. Someone saw your talent, someone saw your resume, and they hired you and you succeeded and you got rehired and rehired and rehired. So I don't call that luck, but you can.
It's your podcast, so I'm not going to contradict you. But it is.
Well, our operational definitions differ widely. All right. I've almost run you out of time. Jon, anything else? I'll actually give you the last words other than me saying thank you.
Well, as you mentioned, there is my website, jonwestfall.com. I'm happy to hear from anyone who wants to talk to me about anything pretty much at any time. And I will be, eager to see what other esteemed people get added to this list of people on this podcast. And thanks for listening to me. Those of you that are out there, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
John, thank you for your time. It's been fun on my end. And other than the last 40 minutes on luck, I hope you've enjoyed all of our time together. You're a good egg. Thank you, John.
Thank you.